The rain had been falling for 3 hours when the man in the gray suit walked into the diner and told the boy to get out from behind the counter. The 11-year-old Marcus Bell did not move. His hands stayed flat on the worn formica, fingers spread the way his grandmother had taught him to stand when a grown person wanted to make him small. Behind him, the coffee machine hissed and steamed, a sound he had learned to love. In front of him stood a man whose shoes had never once touched a puddle in their life, and the man was smiling the way a closed door smiles. "You don't belong here," the man said. "Neither does she. Tell your grandmother the offer expires Friday." The boy's heart was hammering against his ribs. He could feel it in his throat, in the soft place under his jaw. Still, he held the man's eyes, and he did not look away, and somewhere across the dim room a chair scraped slow against the floorboards as a very large figure in black leather rose to his feet. That was the moment everything changed. Marcus did not know it yet. The man in the gray suit, though, was about to learn that the smallest person in the room had more people standing behind him than he could count. To understand how a child ended up holding the line in a roadhouse diner on the edge of a dying highway town, you have to go back 4 months, to the morning Marcus first carried a paper cup of black coffee across a gravel lot to a stranger who looked like the end of the world. His grandmother ran the place. Her name was Delia Bell, and she had owned the Iron Kettle Diner for 19 years, since before Marcus was born, since before his mother left and never came back. The diner sat at the junction of Route 9 and an old county road that nobody used anymore. A low brick building with a tin roof and a hand-painted sign that Delia repainted herself every spring. It served truckers, farm hands, and the kind of travelers who had taken a wrong turn and were too proud to ask for directions. It did not make much money. It had never made much money. Yet it was hers, free and clear, and it was the only home Marcus had ever known. Delia raised him alone after the accident took his mother. She was 63 years old, with hands gnarled from decades of work and a back that ached every morning before the coffee was even on. She taught Marcus to read at the counter, spelling out the words on the laminated menus until the letters made sense. She taught him to count change at the register, to crack an egg one-handed before he was 8, to flip a pancake at the exact moment the bubbles broke and held. She had a way of teaching that never felt like teaching. She would simply do a thing beside him, slow enough that he could watch her hands, and then one day she would step back and let him do it, and only when he had done it would she say that he had been doing it right for a week and just hadn't known. She told him there were 2 kinds of people in the world, the kind who looked out for others and the kind who only looked out for themselves. She said it standing at the grill with her back to him, the way she said the things she meant most. She told him to always be the first kind, even when it cost him, especially when it cost him. She said the second kind always looked like they were winning, right up until the moment they weren't, and that a person should never measure their own life against a clock that ran on somebody else's greed. Marcus did not understand yet how much it could cost. He understood it the way a child understands the ocean from a postcard. He had the shape of it and none of the weight. The weight would come later, all at once, and it would land on a Tuesday in the rain, and he would find out that the things his grandmother told him at the grill with her back turned were not sayings at all. They were instructions. They were a map she had been drawing for him his whole life, against the day he would need to find his way through something she could not carry for him. The diner itself was a living thing to Marcus, every surface known to him the way a person knows the inside of their own hand. The counter was worn pale where 19 years of elbows had rested. The third stool from the end wobbled, and Delia had been meaning to fix it for as long as Marcus could remember, and never had, because the regulars all knew to skip it, and a wobbly stool was a small price for the comfort of a thing that did not change. The coffee machine was older than Marcus, and had been repaired so many times that Delia said it was held together by faith and electrical tape. It hissed when it ran, it groaned when it heated, and it made the best coffee for 40 miles in any direction. A fact every trucker on Route 9 knew, and several had tattooed in their memory of better days. The men on motorcycles started coming in the spring. They came in twos and threes at first, then in larger groups, rumbling up Route 9 in the late afternoon when the light went gold and long across the fields. You heard them before you saw them, a low rolling thunder that came up out of the south and grew until the windows buzzed in their frames. Marcus learned to tell their numbers by the sound, the way a farmer tells weather by the smell of the air. 3 bikes was a ripple, a dozen was an earthquake that arrived slow. They wore black leather vests with patches on the back, a snarling iron wolf above an arc of stitched letters that read St. L. Vanguard, and below that a curved bottom rocker, naming a county Marcus had only ever seen on maps. Delia served them like she served everyone, with a full pot and no questions, and over the weeks something settled between her diner and those men that was not quite friendship, but was steadier than most friendships ever get. They never started trouble. They cleaned up after themselves better than the truckers did. And the one time a drunk farmhand had gotten loud with Delia over a cold plate, 2 of the younger riders had simply stood up, said nothing, and waited. And the farmhand had paid and left, and never come back. Marcus was fascinated by them. He watched from behind the counter as they came in dusty and quiet, ate without complaint, left without trouble, and tipped and folded bills they pressed under their plates. He learned their faces before he learned their names. There was a huge man with a gray beard who always sat at the same corner table, his back to the wall and his eyes to the door, and who spoke so little that Marcus had decided he must be the most important one. The others watched him without seeming to, the way iron filings lean toward a magnet they cannot see. There was a lean man with cold eyes and a scar down one cheek, who never seemed to relax, whose gaze swept every room he entered like he was counting exits and weighing the people in it. And there were others, younger ones, who laughed more and rode harder, and treated the old men with a deference Marcus did not see anywhere else in his life. Not at school, not at church, not anywhere people were supposed to respect their elders and mostly didn't. One afternoon in early summer, a boy from Marcus's school came in with his father and saw the bikers at their tables. The boy's name was Tyler, and he sat 2 rows over in class, and he had never once been unkind to Marcus, which made what happened worse somehow. Tyler's father went pale the moment he saw the leather. He put a hand on his son's shoulder. The same protective gesture Marcus would later see his own grandmother make, except this hand was pulling a child away from imagined danger rather than toward it. He left money on the table for food they had not yet been served. He gathered Tyler and steered him out the door, and through the window Marcus watched the man hurry his son across the lot with his head down, as though the riders might give chase. They did not even look up. Marcus watched them go. Then he watched the gray-bearded man notice the empty plates and the dropped napkins and the bills, left for a meal nobody would eat, and he watched something flicker across that weathered face that Marcus could not name. Sadness, maybe. The particular tiredness of a man used to being feared by people who had never spoken a word to him, who had decided who he was from the cut on his back and would never once ask. The gray-bearded man said nothing. He picked up Tyler's father's money, walked it to the register, and told Delia to put it in the jar she kept for the regulars who came up short at the end of the month. Then he went back to his corner and drank his coffee, and Marcus, 11 years old and watching from behind the counter, understood that he had just seen something true, that the man at the door had been too frightened to see. That was the day Marcus decided to do something his grandmother had not asked him to do. The school he attended was 20 minutes up the county road, and Delia gave him $3 every morning for lunch. It was not much. She apologized for it sometimes, told him she wished it could be more, and he always told her it was plenty because he could see what the apology cost her. $3 bought a carton of milk and a tray of whatever the cafeteria was serving. It was enough. He had never thought about it as a thing he could spend any other way. The diner's good coffee, though the real coffee, the dark roast Delia bought in bags from a roaster, 2 towns over, sold for $1.50 a cup, and the gray-bearded man drank it black, 3 cups a sitting. And Marcus had noticed that on the days the regular drip ran low, Delia made do with the cheaper stuff, and the man drank that too without a word, though his shoulders sat differently. So one Friday in June, Marcus did not eat lunch. He folded his $3 into his pocket and felt his stomach growl all through the afternoon, through fourth period math, and the long bus ride home with the smell of the cafeteria still teasing him from the front of the bus where someone had saved their fries. He thought he might lose his nerve. He thought about the milk he had not bought and the tray he had not carried, and how easy it would have been, and how nobody would ever have known. Then he got home, and he took $2 of the 3, and he made a cup of the good dark roast with his own hands, careful and slow the way his grandmother had shown him, waiting for the bubbles to break right and the steam to come up clean. And he carried it out across the gravel lot to where the gray-bearded man stood beside a motorcycle that gleamed like black water. The man looked down at the boy. The boy looked up at the man. The cup steamed between them in the warm evening air. "On me," Marcus said. His voice shook, but he got the words out. "The good kind, not the cheap kind. You like the good kind." For a long moment the man said nothing. The whole lot seemed to go still, the other riders pausing where they stood, the cicadas loud in the long grass beyond the asphalt. Then the gray-bearded man took the cup in one enormous scarred hand, and he drank, and he closed his eyes for just a second, and when he opened them again, they were wet at the corners. "What's your name, son?" he said. His voice was a low gravel rumble that Marcus felt in his own chest. "Marcus. You buy this with your own money, Marcus?" The boy hesitated. Then he nodded, because his grandmother had also taught him not to lie, even when the truth made you look foolish. "Skipped my lunch," he said. "It's okay. I wasn't that hungry." Something moved through the assembled men, a current that had no sound, but that Marcus felt all the same. The gray-bearded man crouched down so that his eyes were level with the boy's, and the silver wolf on his back caught the dying light. "You skipped your lunch," the man said slowly, "to buy a man you don't know a cup of coffee." "You're not a stranger," Marcus said. "You come here all the time. Grandma says you're good people. She says good people look out for each other." The man was quiet for a long time. The lean man with the scar had come to stand at his shoulder, and his cold eyes were fixed on the boy with an expression Marcus could not read. When the gray-bearded man finally spoke, he did not speak to Marcus. He spoke to the men around him, without turning his head. "Nobody bullies this kid," he said. "Nobody bullies his grandmother. Anybody got a problem in this town, they got a problem with us. Pass it on." And that was how it started. That was the small thing, the cup of coffee carried across a gravel lot by a hungry boy that set in motion everything that came after. Marcus went back inside and helped his grandmother close up, and he did not tell her what he had done, and that night he ate 2 helpings of dinner, because he was very hungry. Delia watched him eat with a small frown she did not explain. He did not know that he had just been adopted. He did not know that a debt had been written in a ledger that no bank kept, in a currency no court recognized, and that the men who kept that ledger never, ever let a debt go unpaid. What Marcus did not know was that his grandmother was in trouble. It had started 6 weeks earlier with a letter, then another letter, then a man in a gray suit who came to the diner during the slow hour and sat at the counter and ordered nothing and talked to Delia in a low voice while Marcus did his homework in the back booth and pretended not to listen. The man's name was Preston Hale. He worked for a development company called Meridian Holdings, and Meridian Holdings wanted the land the Iron Kettle sat on, not the diner. The land. Route 9 was going to be widened into a 4-lane connector to the new distribution center going up 40 miles east, and the junction where Delia's diner stood was going to become a freeway interchange worth more money than Delia Bell had seen in her entire life. The company had bought up every parcel along the corridor, every one except hers. She had said no. She kept saying no. The diner was not for sale at any price, she told them, because it was not a business to her. It was the place she had raised her grandson and buried her daughter's memory, and it was the one thing in her life that was entirely her own. Preston Hale had smiled at that the way he smiled at everything, and he had told her that everyone has a price, and that the offers would not stay generous forever, and that she should think very carefully about what was best for the boy. That last part was not a kindness. Marcus understood that even at 11. The way the man said the boy made the words feel like a hand closing around something soft. Over the following weeks, the pressure changed shape. A county inspector arrived unannounced and found a dozen code violations that had never been violations before. The diner's insurance carrier sent a letter raising her rates for reasons that did not make sense. A supplier who had delivered to the Iron Kettle for 15 years suddenly could no longer make the route. Each thing alone was survivable. Together they were a noose, and the noose was tightening, and Delia worked longer hours and slept less, and told Marcus everything was fine in a voice that did not match her eyes. Marcus found the letters in a drawer one night when he was looking for stamps. He read them by the light of the refrigerator, his bare feet, cold on the kitchen tile, the hum of the old appliance, the only sound in the dark house. He understood enough to be afraid. The letterhead read Meridian Holdings. Final notice. The figure they were offering had a lot of zeros, more money than he could picture, and for one dizzy moment, a part of him wondered if it would be so bad to take it, to have his grandmother stop hurting and stop working and stop pretending. Then he read the sentence underneath the offer, the one about how the company was prepared to pursue all available legal remedies to acquire the parcel, and the dizzy feeling curdled into something colder. He did not know exactly what those words meant. He knew the tone of them, though. It was the tone Tyler's father had worn leaving the diner. It was the sound a person makes when they have already decided they are going to win and are only being polite about it. It was a threat, dressed up in clean clothes, and the clean clothes made it worse, not better. He put the letters back exactly as he had found them, squaring the edges, sliding the drawer, shut by degrees so the runners would not squeak. He stood in the dark kitchen for a long time. Down the hall he could hear his grandmother's breathing, slow and even. The only hours of the day she was not bracing against something. He decided then that he would not be the thing she had to brace against. Whatever this was, he would carry his corner of it quietly, and he would not let her know he knew, because the one mercy he could give her was the belief that he was still small enough to be protected. The next morning, when the Steel Vanguard riders came rumbling up Route 9 for their afternoon coffee, Marcus watched the gray-bearded man take his usual corner table, and he made a decision. He did not have the words for it yet. He understood it anyway, in the simple, direct way that children understand things, that there were two kinds of power in his world. There was the kind that came in a gray suit and threatened you with clean paper and reasonable voices, and there was the kind that drank black coffee at a corner table and had told a room full of men that nobody bullies this kid. He just did not yet know how to ask. The asking happened by accident 3 days later, on a Tuesday that started ordinary and did not stay that way. Preston Hale came to the diner at the slow hour the way he always did, but this time he did not come alone. Two larger men came with him, men with thick necks and folded arms who stood by the door and did not order anything. Hale sat at the counter and told Delia, in his low, reasonable voice, that the situation had become urgent. The county was prepared to invoke eminent domain. The diner would be taken either way. The only question was whether she walked away with a fair price or with nothing. He said it the way a man says a thing he has said many times, bored almost, certain of the outcome. And Marcus, who was supposed to be in the back, came out from behind the counter and stood beside his grandmother, and he said, "She told you." "No." Hale looked at the boy as if noticing him for the first time. "This doesn't concern you, son." "It's my home," Marcus said. "It concerns me." The two men by the door shifted their weight. Delia put her hand on Marcus's shoulder and tried to push him gently back, but he would not be pushed. And it was at that exact moment, with the rain just beginning to spatter against the windows, that the door opened and the gray-bearded man walked in, out of the wet, alone, for his afternoon coffee, and stopped and read the room in a single sweep of his eyes. He did not say anything at first. He walked to his corner table and sat down. He nodded once at Delia, who brought him his coffee with hands that trembled slightly, and he watched. He watched the man in the gray suit, and the two thick-necked men by the door, and the boy standing his ground in front of his grandmother, and slowly the gray-bearded man set his cup down on the scarred table and stood back up. "Everything all right here, Delia," he said. It was not really a question. Preston Hale turned on his stool and took the measure of the large man in leather, and he made the first of several mistakes he would make that afternoon. He smiled his closed-door smile and said, "This is a private business matter. I'm sure a man like you understands. Why don't you finish your coffee?" The diner went very quiet. Outside, an engine rumbled in the lot. Then another, then several, the riders arriving for the afternoon, and the sound came through the walls like distant thunder. Hale did not notice it. The gray-bearded man did. So did Marcus. "A man like me," the gray-bearded man repeated. He came across the room without hurrying, and he was a head taller than the thick-necked men by the door, and they stepped aside without being asked. "You don't know the first thing about a man like me. I know plenty about a man like you, though. You're the kind that does his fighting with paper, because he's never once had to do it any other way." Hale's smile flickered. "I don't know who you think you are. I'm the man," he said, "who drinks the coffee that boy bought me with his lunch money. And I'm telling you that you've walked into the wrong diner." The door opened again. The lean man with the scar came in, shaking rain off his shoulders, and behind him came 3 more riders, and they filled the doorway and the entrance, and they did not say anything at all. They just looked at Preston Hale and his 2 men with the flat, patient attention of people who have all the time in the world. The thick-necked men by the door were not paid enough for this. One of them muttered something to Hale, who waved him off, but his certainty had cracked, and everyone in the room could see it. Marcus watched the man's face change, watched the bored confidence give way to a calculation that was arriving too late. "I'll be in touch," Hale said. He stood, smoothed his jacket, and tried to leave with his dignity. But the riders did not move from the door, and for one long moment the man in the gray suit stood trapped in a room full of people who were not afraid of him, a sensation he had perhaps never experienced in his adult life. Then the gray-bearded man tilted his head a fraction, and the wall of leather parted just enough. And Preston Hale walked out into the rain a smaller man than he had walked in. His car threw gravel as it left. When it was gone, gray-bearded man crouched down in front of Marcus the way he had on the night of the coffee. "You knew," he said. "You knew about this, and you didn't tell your grandmother you knew." Marcus nodded. His eyes had filled with tears he was determined not to let fall. "I didn't want her to worry more," he said. "She already doesn't sleep." The big man looked at Delia, who had sunk onto a stool with her hand over her mouth, and then back at the boy, and something settled in his face that was harder than anything Marcus had seen there before. "Tell me everything," he said. From the first letter, so Delia told him. She told him about Meridian Holdings and Preston Hale, about the inspector and the insurance and the supplier, who could no longer find the road. She told him about eminent domain, and the figure with all its zeros, and the threat dressed in clean clothes. The gray-bearded man listened without interrupting, and the lean man with the scar listened beside him. And when Delia was done, the gray-bearded man was quiet for a long time. "This isn't a thing fists fix," he said finally. "This is a paper fight. So we'll fight it on paper, and we'll fight it better than they do." Marcus did not understand what that meant. Over the next 2 weeks, though, he watched it happen, and what he watched changed the way he understood the world. The Steel Vanguard, it turned out, was not only what it appeared to be. The lean man with the scar had spent 20 years as a combat engineer before the road claimed him. And he read contracts the way other men read road signs, his finger moving down the clauses, pausing where the language thickened to hide something. He sat at the corner table for 3 nights running with the Meridian offer letters spread in front of him and a yellow legal pad at his elbow, and he made notes in a small, precise hand, and now and then he made a sound low in his throat that meant he had found another thread to pull. One of the younger writers, a quiet one with quick eyes who Marcus had never paid much attention to, turned out to have a head for records and filings, and the patient work of finding what people in clean suits would rather keep hidden. He brought a laptop into the diner and set it on the corner table and worked through the county's public databases the way the lean man worked through the contracts. Methodical, unhurried, certain that the truth was in there somewhere if a person was only willing to read every line. And the gray-bearded man knew people. He knew them everywhere, in every town the highway touched, men and women who owed him things that had nothing to do with money. A retired surveyor who owed him a favor from a bad winter long ago when the club had cleared a snowed-in road to get the man's wife to a hospital. The surveyor came to the diner with rolled plats under his arm and spread them on the counter, and showed Marcus, who hovered close, exactly where the new interchange would sit, and exactly how much that ground would be worth once the road came. A clerk at the county recorder's office, whose late husband had ridden with the club, who quietly pulled the filings nobody had thought anyone would ever ask to see. A newspaperman, 3 towns over, who had been waiting 15 years for a story exactly like this one, and who listened to the whole thing with his coffee going cold, and then said, very quietly, that he was going to need to see the documents. They did not break a single law. That was the thing that astonished Marcus most, and it was the thing the lean man with the scar made sure the boy understood. They did not threaten anyone, did not raise a hand, did not so much as raise their voices. Every paper they gathered was a public record that anyone could have requested. Every fact they assembled had been sitting in the open the whole time, waiting for someone with the patience to put the pieces in a row. The power, the lean man told Marcus one evening, was never in the fists. The fists were just what frightened people looked at, so they would not have to look at the paper. The paper was where the real war was fought, and the men in the clean suits won it every time because they counted on nobody on the other side knowing how to read. What they found was this. Meridian Holdings had bought up the corridor at suspiciously low prices, parcel by parcel, leaning on each owner the way they had leaned on Delia until the owner gave in. And the man who had pushed the road-widening project through the county board owned a hidden stake in the company through a shell entity. The quiet young rider unwound across 3 long nights of patient digging, following the ownership from one name to another, to a post office box, to a lawyer's office. The code violations the inspector had found at the diner were fabricated, written up for a building that met every code it had met the year before and the year before that, and the inspector had been to the same country club as Preston Hale 11 times in the past year, the guest log showing him as Hale's guest. 11 rounds of golf that the inspector's salary could never have paid for. The figure Meridian offered Delia was a fraction of what the parcel would be worth as an interchange, and the difference, the surveyor explained, laying his weathered finger on the plat, would have gone straight into the pockets of the men who had arranged for the road to come. It was, the newspaperman said when they brought it all to him, the cleanest case of public corruption he had seen in 30 years, and it had been handed to him by a motorcycle club and an 11-year-old boy. The story ran on a Sunday. By Wednesday, the county board member had resigned. By the following Monday, the state had opened an investigation into Meridian Holdings, and the road-widening project was suspended pending review. And Preston Hale's name was in the paper, next to words like fraud and conspiracy. The gray-bearded man was not finished, though. There was one more thing he wanted the boy to see, and on a Friday evening at the slow hour he had the boy stand behind the counter where it had all begun, and he waited. Preston Hale came because he was summoned, though no summons was ever written. The club had simply let it be known through the channels such things travel that the man would want to come to the Iron Kettle Diner one last time, and that it would go better for him if he did. He arrived without his thick-necked men. He arrived alone, in a suit that was no longer crisp, with the look of a man who had not slept, and who understood at last that the ground had shifted under him in a way no lawyer could fix. The diner was full of leather. Every table held a writer. The gray-bearded man sat at his corner, and Marcus stood behind the counter, and Delia stood beside her grandson, with her hand on his shoulder, and the rain had stopped, and the evening light came gold and long through the windows. "Sit down," the gray-bearded man said. Hale sat. His hands were not steady. "You came into this woman's home," the gray-bearded man said, "and you used the law like a club to take the one thing she had. You threatened a child. You thought because nobody had ever stopped you, nobody ever would." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped, and the whole room leaned with him. "You were wrong about who was watching." Hale's composure broke then all at once the way a dam breaks. He began to talk fast, to explain, to bargain. He said he had only been doing his job. He said the others had pressured him. He said he could make it right. He could testify. He could give them names. His voice climbed higher and thinner with each sentence, and Marcus watched the man who had once made his grandmother tremble, reduced to begging in a room full of people who simply watched him do it. The gray-bearded man let him talk until he ran out of words. Then he said, "I'm not the one you have to answer to. The investigators will see to that. We just wanted you to understand something before they do." He stood, and he was very tall, and the silver wolf gleamed on his back. This boy skipped his lunch to buy a man a cup of coffee because his grandmother taught him to look out for people. That's the whole reason you lost. Not because we're stronger than you, because he's better than you, and people like that have people like us. Now get out of this diner. You're not welcome here, and you never will be again. Preston Hale got up. He did not smooth his jacket this time. He walked to the door through the silent gauntlet of leather and chrome, and he stepped out into the gold evening, and the door swung shut behind him. And that was the last time anyone at the Iron Kettle ever saw him. The charges came in the fall. He did not flee into any sunlight. He simply disappeared into the slow machinery of the courts, which would grind on him for years. When he was gone, the diner let out a breath it had been holding for months. The riders began to talk and laugh, and Delia put on a fresh pot of the good dark roast, and the gray-bearded man came to the counter and looked down at Marcus over the worn formica where the boy had held the line. "You did a brave thing," he said, "all of it. The coffee, standing your ground, not telling your grandmother because you wanted to carry it for her. That's not a small thing, son. That's the biggest thing there is." Marcus did not know what to say, so he did the only thing he could think to do. He took a clean cup from the stack, and he filled it with the good dark roast, the real kind, not the cheap kind, and he set it on the counter in front of the gray-bearded man. "On the house," he said, "always, every time, forever." The big man laughed, a sound like gravel rolling downhill, and he took the cup in his enormous scarred hand and he drank. The road never got widened. The interchange went somewhere else, 2 junctions north. On land, nobody had been cheated out of. The Iron Kettle Diner stayed exactly where it had stood for 19 years, at the corner of Route 9, and a county road nobody used, with its tin roof and its hand-painted sign that Delia repainted every spring. Things were different now. The Steel Vanguard came more often, and they no longer came as men a town feared. Ward had traveled the way word does about what had happened at the diner and who had made it happen, and the families who had once gathered their children and left now nodded at the riders in the lot. Some of them even ordered coffee at the counter and stayed. Delia got better at sleeping. The lines in her face did not all go away because some lines are earned and stay. But the tightness around her eyes eased, and she laughed more, and she taught Marcus the last few things she had been saving to teach him because now she believed she would have the time. And Marcus grew up in a place where he belonged more than he had ever known a person could belong. The gray-bearded man taught him to change the oil on a motorcycle when he was 13, and to ride one in the empty lot when he was 15, with Delia watching from the doorway with her heart in her mouth. The lean man with the scar, who had never once relaxed in all the years Marcus had known him, taught the boy how to read a contract and find the lie hidden in the fine print, and told him that the most dangerous men in the world were not the ones who looked dangerous, and that the most powerful thing a person could be was the kind of person other people wanted to stand behind. On the wall behind the counter, where it stayed for years, hung a paper coffee cup, empty now and gone soft with age. The first cup Marcus had ever carried across the gravel lot. Nobody who did not know the story understood why it was there. Everybody who knew the story understood exactly. Years later, when Marcus was grown and the gray-bearded man was older and slower and gray all over, now the boy who had skipped his lunch stood behind that same counter on a gold evening at the slow hour. And he made a pot of the good dark roast with his own hands, careful and slow the way his grandmother had taught him long ago. And he carried a cup out across the gravel lot to where the old man sat beside a motorcycle that no longer gleamed quite so bright. The cicadas were loud in the long grass. The chrome caught the last of the light. And the old man took the cup in his hand, which was not so steady anymore, and he drank, and he closed his eyes for just a second the way he had the very first time it smelled like coming home. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the smallest act of kindness can call down the loudest thunder, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to remember that the good ones are never as alone as they feel. Thank you for listening.